Indicating, indicating.
No! It's always a real thing. We're dealing with live ammunition. We're dealing with high explosive. So there's no exercise or for practice.
What you have just seen is a gigantic maritime exercise in which the United States and Australia, among other Pacific nations, participated. For years, NATO has been preparing to face the most powerful enemy on the planet. We are not referring to Russia or Islamic terrorism, but to the great power of Asia, the Federal Republic of China. In this new video from Military Force, we want to present to you the tense situation that exists in that region of the world, what military capabilities Xi Jinping's army has, and how a combined attack by all NATO nations against the Chinese giant could result.
Mount 31, shoot.
Despite its borders being thousands of miles from NATO's boundaries, China is increasingly openly expressing its distrust of the organization. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent clashes between the US-led Atlantic Alliance and the bloc formed by Moscow and Beijing only increased these tensions. For its part, NATO has denounced the Asian power for undermining the global order in terms of security, with its constant military exercises that often sail through the waters of other neighboring nations. Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of the organization, announced in April 2022 that its defense strategy will include China for the first time. He specified how its growing influence and coercive policies affect global security. But what does this really mean in terms of war? NATO's military power is mainly concentrated in the United States, the country that owns the second largest maritime fleet on the planet. With a brutal combination of 347,044 active personnel, 108,789 in reserve, and more than 490 ships, including a dozen aircraft carriers, 17 cruisers, 72 destroyers, and 21 amphibious assault ships. Add to this the 81 French ships and 55 German units, to name 2 powerful NATO members, and it results in a highly comprehensive front to launch a naval attack on China. However, there is one fundamental detail to keep in mind. Beijing is currently the largest and most modern navy on the planet, having recently surpassed Uncle Sam in number of ships after decades of hegemony. While Xi Jinping's men have only 3 aircraft carriers, one of which is under construction, they also have 49 destroyers, 42 frigates, 72 corvettes, and 102 missile boats. A powerful wall protecting the Asian dragon. We are not focusing on naval power for the sake of it. There is one clear and highly strategic reason: the South China Sea. It is a gigantic body of water belonging to the Pacific Ocean. It covers an area of about 3,500,000 square kilometers that includes the coasts of Indonesia, Malaysia, Taiwan, Borneo, the Philippines, and, of course, China. It is a region of enormous economic and geostrategic importance for several reasons. Firstly, 1/3 of the world's maritime shipping passes through this sea, transporting more than $3 trillion in trade each year. Also, it is believed that beneath its bed lie enormous natural reserves that have greatly interested Beijing. Finally, this area contains lucrative fisheries, crucial for the food security of millions of people in Southeast Asia. In other words, this will be the great spoils of war that NATO and China will fight over.
En 2016, esta cifra ascendió a unos 3 billones, lo que equivale a más del 30% del comercio mundial de petróleo crudo marítimo. Además, tiene depósitos de petróleo y gas muy prometedores, algo que a cada una de las naciones que reivindican el territorio le encantaría obtener en los próximos años.
Because of its great value, this body of water has been the subject of great tension. In March 2024, the hypothetical tension led to concrete aggression when a Philippine-flagged ship was intercepted by the Chinese Coast Guard. Suspecting that it was a shipment to military detachments on the Ayungin sandbank, and considering that such operations are an encroachment on its territorial limits, Xi Jinping's government decided to attack, although not with deadly force. They used high-powered water hoses that forced the Philippine ship to turn back and cancel its mission. It was a first warning for sure. Next time, water will not be used as a deterrent. Let's listen to the words of Lin Jian, the spokesperson of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Frente a la irrupción forzada de los buques filipinos, la Guardia Costera China ha tomado las medidas de aplicación de la ley necesarias.
According to an international court's decision, the Philippines was within its rights to sail into that region of the South China Sea. But Beijing does not agree. They believe that its natural heritage extends far beyond what Western maps indicate. This has been the cause of constant conflicts and mediations with the Asian Titan's neighbors. It is only a matter of time before the debate turns into concrete military actions. Beijing is very clear that the Philippines has been a direct ally of the United States for decades and, therefore, an honorary headquarters of NATO in the region. That is why Xi Jinping and his government have adopted such an aggressive policy with that nation. Their goal is to avoid being surrounded by enemies, as happened to the Russian Federation, which today has its borders surrounded by strategic allies of the West. Like the Russian government, President Xi Jinping has pointed to NATO as responsible for the conflict. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has accused the organization of having put Russia on the ropes by having accepted 14 new members since the end of the Cold War, including countries bordering the nation led by Vladimir Putin. China believes that the United States wants to install the Atlantic Alliance de facto in front of its doors, planting its flag permanently in the area. Wang Yi, Minister of Foreign Affairs, declared, "This union has ruined Europe. Is it now trying to ruin Asia-Pacific and even the world? The real objective of the US strategy in the Indo-Pacific is to create a branch of NATO in the region." China's policy is not limited to denunciations, but is also preparing for a direct confrontation with its Western enemies.
Con el tiempo hemos presenciado el establecimiento de pistas de aterrizaje, puestos de escucha y estaciones de reabastecimiento, para que China pueda enviar a sus buques a esas islas y también para poder patrullar mejor una gran parte del mar de China meridional.
But beyond the stations and other operational facilities, Beijing's trump card in facing a war with the United States and the Atlantic Alliance is a missile. A particularly powerful one with astonishing capabilities. We are referring to the DF-21, also called CSS-5, a Chinese medium-range two-stage solid fuel-powered ballistic missile developed in the early 1980s. It was first tested on May 1, 1985, and has since become the main defense for hunting aircraft carriers in the nation's territorial waters. The DF-21 is specially created to destroy carriers, the most expensive and important ships in any fleet. In recent years, the US State Department reported that China was developing a land-based supersonic anti-ship version of the DF-21, known as the DF-21D, with a range of more than 1,400 kilometers. The purpose of this version would be to increase the radius of attack on military vessels. This move has definitely been influenced by NATO's growing presence in the Pacific. Constant bipartisan exercises and collaboration between nations put Chinese engineers on alert. The order that came from the highest levels was to build a weapon capable of blowing Uncle Sam's carriers to smithereens. Let's see this beast in action in a test video uploaded to social media by the Chinese Communist Party. The level of destruction it caused on the mock aircraft carrier was truly impressive, but there is a huge distance between destroying a static target on land and hitting a well-armed moving combat ship. Given China's enormous defensive capabilities, the best hope for the United States and NATO is to launch a multiple simultaneous attack in which they can surpass the Asian country's response virtues. Remember that it has a coastline of almost 14,500 kilometers in length, which opens up a gigantic theater of operations for that naval alliance that we previously detailed between countries such as Germany, France, and American troops. The great advantage that Washington has when launching an attack against China is its enormous air superiority. The Asian giant is in the midst of modernization, and while its navy is already at the level of the best on the planet, the truth is that its sky warriors are far from it. In this context, the US F-35s and F-16s will be crucial to penetrate enemy airspace and destroy high-value targets such as radars, military bases, missile launchers, and landing strips. The best example for this context is the first weeks in the Ukraine war, when Russia used the best of its air capabilities to destroy almost all airports, runways, depots, and military bases, which had a hard impact on the initial response of Zelensky's country. In that case, China's survival will depend entirely on how much Russia wants to commit to the defense of its filthy land. As you may have noticed, in this analysis, we have left the country led by Vladimir Putin out of the equation since its inclusion radically alters any forecast. Beyond this decision for the sake of the game of assumptions, it is clear that, in the event of a war between NATO and Beijing, the Kremlin has already decided which side it will support. Let's listen to the words of Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of the Western Organization.
China
se ha convertido en un facilitador decisivo de la guerra de Rusia contra Ucrania. Un apoyo que aumenta la amenaza que Rusia representa para la seguridad euroatlántica. Hemos declarado claramente que China no puede permitir el conflicto más grande de Europa en la historia reciente sin que esto afecte negativamente sus intereses o reputación.
Stoltenberg's statements were harsh, as he accused Xi Jinping of being a direct participant in the destruction of Ukraine, and therefore, an enemy of the Atlantic Alliance. From China, this was taken with little pleasure as they consider this act as pure incitement to violence between nations. The spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs made it clear that they will not tolerate such provocations.
Es obvio para la comunidad internacional que está avivando las llamas y echando más leña al fuego en la prolongada crisis de Ucrania. Instamos a la OTAN a reflexionar sobre las causas profundas de la crisis y sus propias acciones.
Putting fuel on the fire is a worrying expression when two of the largest military powers on the planet are in the middle. And if we speak in such grandiloquent terms, it is necessary to evaluate the nuclear power of each front and how the use of such weapons could develop in the event of a conflict. The number of nuclear warheads that China possesses is an absolute state secret, but there are fairly precise estimates based on the availability of certain materials and the productive capacity of the Asian giant. According to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, published by the American Federation of Scientists, by 2024, Boeing had approximately 438 nuclear warheads, which places the country as the third with the largest number. It is a brutal figure, more than enough to blow any enemy to pieces. It must be taken into account that, being very extensive, China has this missile power divided into large launch stations that seek to cover and protect as much territory as possible. The missiles are divided by range and are used depending on the threat approaching the country. If NATO decides to attack several different regions simultaneously, the People's Army will be forced to use several missile silos. The problem is that once fired, the installations are discovered by the rival and are exposed to attack. Faced with a dark outlook, Minister Qin Gang referred to the American government and its inability to de-escalate the tension.
美方声称要经营中国，但不寻求冲突。实际上，美方所谓的竞争，就是全方位的遏制、打压，就是你死我活的零和博弈。如果美方不踩刹车，继续沿着错误的道路狂飙下去，再多的护栏也挡不住脱轨翻车，陷入对抗冲突。
The question is, how much nuclear weaponry does the United States and NATO possess? A report from 2024 indicates that Washington has 1,770 warheads ready to use, 1,938 in reserve, and another 1,336 retired and awaiting dismantling. This is a figure exponentially higher than that of China, with the crucial advantage that many of its submarines are capable of launching nuclear-charged missiles that would wreak havoc on Chinese cities. In seconds, ancient territories would become scorched soil covered with human remains turned to dust. The truth is that neither side wants to find out what would happen in a battle of this nature. The power of the warheads is high, and each nation has the necessary strategies to cause brutal damage to the enemy. However, China's claims remain, mainly regarding the increase in Western military presence in its playground. Beijing authorities have frequently repeated this accusation in recent years. To understand it, you need to be familiar with two acronyms, AUKUS and Quad. The creation of the former was announced at the end of 2021, a defense pact under which the US and the UK will help Australia acquire nuclear-powered submarines. This makes China uncomfortable, which has seen its relations with Australia, which were cordial until 2018, deteriorate increasingly, leading to episodes of tension in various areas, from territorial disputes in the South China Sea to the pandemic, and more recently, the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
英澳建立所谓的三方安全伙伴关系，推进核潜艇及其他尖端军事技术合作，这是典型的冷战思维。
But what worries China the most is the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, better known as the Quad. It is a strategic forum that includes military cooperation and defense exercises between the United States, Australia, Japan, and India. Created in 2007 and suspended for almost a decade, the Quad was reactivated in 2017 and has been gaining more and more prominence until today. Japan and India are the two Asian powers that rival China, which also maintains tense territorial disputes with both and with other states in the region, such as the Philippines, Vietnam, or Malaysia. The dispute over the South China Sea and power hegemony in Asia promises to be the next major focus of global conflict. Let us hope that in a war between NATO and the Red Giant ruled by Xi Jinping, nuclear weapons will only be a method of psychological deterrence and not a concrete option to cause chaos. Thus, we come to the end of the video. If you like this content and want to continue learning about more high-risk hypothetical scenarios, we invite you to subscribe and activate notifications. Without further ado, we say goodbye until the next installment of Military Force. Thank you for joining us.